Turning to the road to 2024, we're bringing back in Niall Stanage, White House columnist with our partner, The Hill. Niall, thanks so much for being here.
Good to be with you, Natasha.
So we're looking at the situation. Both Governor DeSantis and former President Trump scheduled to be in Iowa tonight, and Governor DeSantis still not officially announcing his presidential run. All signs leaning towards it, including his comments to Kelly Meyer earlier this evening. What is the latest? When can we expect to hear DeSantis actually throw his hat in the ring?
Well, I mean, there's some suggestion that he could perhaps get in the next couple of weeks. That pertains to a rather complicated issue about paperwork that he may need to file if his campaign or his political operation moves offices on Monday, which they're expected to do. But look, I think broadly, the question now, Natasha, is less about the specificity of the timing. It's just the expectation that Ron DeSantis is going to enter the race, and how's he going to do? Because he is, after all, lagging a very, very considerable distance behind former President Trump in polls of the primary field.
The battle between DeSantis and Trump seems already to be playing out. We know the Trump campaign released a new video of their candidate bashing DeSantis. Let's take a quick listen together.
The problem with Ron DeSanctimonious is that he needs a personality transplant, and those are not yet available.
So the former president maintaining pretty much the same tone that he's had for years when dealing with opponents. Are undecided voters on the right still swayed by this sort of rhetoric, or is he mainly doing this for his base?
Well, I mean, in the polling average of the Republican primary, he's now up by about 30 points over Ron DeSantis, having been leading him by significantly less than that only a month or 6 weeks ago. So that would suggest that some combination of those kind of personalized attacks like you just played, attacks by a super PAC supporting former President Trump, and missteps by Ron DeSantis have all had an effect. Now, that's not to say that the race is somehow decided in the May before election year. Clearly it isn't. But President Trump, former President Trump, has had a lot of success in the past 6 weeks or so in expanding that polling lead.
You know, in this moment, with the most recent polling you're talking about, how would either Mr. Trump or Governor DeSantis match up against Biden head to head?
So it depends which poll you look at, is the short answer to that. There was a poll just a short time ago, a week or so ago, from the Washington Post and ABC that put the former President Trump up by 6 or 7 points over President Biden. That's unusual because, as a broad matter, Ron DeSantis does better against President Biden than former President Trump does against President Biden. This, of course, goes to the bigger question of electability in a general election, who Republican voters feel gives them the best chance. There you have on your screen now, I see a 7-point lead for Governor DeSantis over President Biden. That's the sort of poll that obviously the DeSantis campaign would want to make a lot of, to put plenty of emphasis upon.
One more question for you right now, Niall. What accounts for Mr. Trump's surge in polling in the last few weeks? And does it mean that the trial with E. Jean Carroll, the writer, did not perhaps have a negative impact?
I think it's too early to say on the last point, Natasha. I think a couple of things have had an impact. Clearly, the criminal case against former President Trump brought by Alvin Bragg has caused Republican voters to rally around the former president. I think Republican voters at least believing that that is a rather flimsy case. There is, as I say, significant amounts of advertising by allies of the former president aimed at Governor DeSantis. And then Governor DeSantis has made some errors, most notably when he seemed to play down the importance of the war in Ukraine or to minimize it. That was a mess that he had to try to extricate himself from.
Okay. Always appreciate the time and context. Niall Stanage, thank you so much. Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.